Well, I think it was the Vice video I was watching of you, and you guys were talking about a situation where it was like you had guns pointed at you, and they were trying to pull you out of a car,
Yeah,
and you put the seatbelt on, right? I mean, that's stuff that all can affect your mental health, right? And
for
you made
sure.
decisions there, but yeah. So how did you like? Were you always cognizant of mental health and brain health? And
No, no, it wasn't until I was probably, I think I was on my third or fourth deployment at the agency when I started realizing that something was wrong. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that something had changed and something was wrong. And I had been gone 10 months a year every year since I was probably 20 years old. And lots of life and death type stuff, lots of boredom too, lots of good training. And I just knew that something was off. But what I have learned since, to kind of flash forward to today, is that the issues I was dealing with were not primarily mental health related, even though there was portions of that, right? There was some pots that were starting to boil over. It was actually largely brain health related, and my neurotransmitter levels were not where they needed to be. My endocrine system was completely jacked up from chemical exposures and traumatic brain injury and micro traumas to my brain because of all the things that I had experienced. I was actually at the Amen clinics getting a brain scan. And they fill you full of these radioactive dyes and put you in a CT machine, and you lay there for a while, and then they come back and about a week or so later they give you your brain scans, and I have copies of them, and there's parts of my brain that, because it's measuring blood flow, look like they have holes in them, right? I mean, like the brain and certain parts just kind of looks like Swiss cheese, and the doctor was like, "Hi, I wonder what happened there," like pointing to the spot on the back of my head. And I was like, "Oh, I'll tell you exactly what happened there. That was a free fall accident where I eggshelled it. I hit the ground so hard I eggshelled a helmet." And so when we talk about brain health and mental health, I think there's a Venn diagram there and there's some overlap, but we have to always keep in mind that just because somebody experienced something traumatic, right? So actually was an orphan. I was abandoned by my father before I was born, and I was abandoned by my mother roughly around the age of 2. I don't know exactly when it was. It literally dropped me on the steps of an orphanage, right? Late 1970s, and so that's a lot of trauma. Now, you don't realize it until you get older and you're like, okay, well, maybe there's some mental health issues I have to deal with here. But the symptoms that you get from, say, experiencing trauma as a young child, well, you can get the exact same symptoms from just having a structural problem, right? Which is the actual brain itself does not work the way that it's supposed to because of physical trauma. But then that emotional trauma can also cause structural issues. And so, one of the things that I think that the mental health community needs to do is just take a little bit of a step back and say, hey, let's not just drop prescription drugs on people. Let's look at the brain as an organ first. Let's make sure that the neurotransmitter levels are where they need to be. Let's make sure that there's not a structural issue, an endocrine issue, something that is actually causing these symptoms. Let's make sure to get that fixed first, or in parallel to, say, things like therapy and mental health counseling and those types of things. Like we need to consider the whole of what is above the head, or what is above the shoulders. Right? Is somebody have sleep apnea to the point that their sleep is just absolute trash, and that's why they're having mental health issues, is because they're not sleeping. Because we know that anybody who doesn't sleep well ends up with mental health issues. I mean, that is a very well-established science. We know that just because somebody, experienced some childhood trauma, I'm probably an example of that being essentially post-traumatic thriving as opposed to post-traumatic stress. But then there's other things in my life that happened overseas that do cause a little bit of post-traumatic stress. And so I think that we tend to view these, mental health and physical health and brain health and sleep health. We tend to view them all in a vacuum when the reality is they all work together. And that's something I think the mental health community